I'm now delighted to welcome Oscar Horta to the stage. Oscar is an author, professor at the University of Santiago de Compostela, and co-founder of Animal Ethics. His work addresses wild animal suffering, speciesism, and long-termism. But please welcome to the stage, Oscar.
Quite diverse audience here, but there are some things that we all have in common here. We all care about sentient beings. We know that AI has to do with that, can affect them, and we're all gonna die. None of us here is going to make it to the 22nd century, I'm afraid. Maybe some of you do. I don't expect I will. Or maybe I will, I live healthy. But we can influence those who will be alive then. I met people when I was a kid that were alive in the 19th century. And I know kids who will be alive in the 22nd century. So we can influence them, and, well, they can make it happen so some things occur. So that's the first premise of this talk. We affect the future. We can change the future. Our actions really have an influence on what will happen. And future beings matter just as much as present individuals do. So that's something to take into account as well. Otherwise, we would be discriminating against someone just because of the moment at which they exist. And then there is this third idea, this third premise that we should take into account, which is the future will be vast, way longer than the present is, if we can quantify the extension of the present. So based on these three premises, we can conclude that we should care about what happens when we are gone. And this is the basis of this idea. However, if you look at the literature on this, it looks like long-termism is not about that. Long-termism is about the future of humanity. You can find this idea in many different places. Or you can find the idea that long-termism is about ensuring that the future of humanity is great in that we expand through the galaxies and create this vast amount of positive value. But we don't know if that's going to happen. And more than that, there are other individuals who matter in addition to human beings. So this definition is wrong. It's based basically on an idea that discriminates against those who are not humans. We are not taking into account seriously the interests of those individuals just because of the species they belong. And in fact, what may happen in the future is that things don't go as well. Just because the future will be that long, suffering in the future will be orders of magnitude more significant than it is in the present. In addition, there are other considerations that we saw already before in the previous presentation by Daniela, which is that there may be a synchronic expansion at every given point, at each given point. There may be more sentient beings suffering than there are now, and their suffering may be more severe. There are different ways in which this can happen. If we consider animals exploited by humans, this can happen by just scaling up the number of individuals affected, and we saw already something of this. We can see it, for instance, with the use of AI to expand fish farming. Offshore fish farming can be a reality thanks to this. Then we can increase the efficiency in animal exploitation, as it happens with multi-stores farms in China so far, maybe in other places in the future, just because, the use of AI facilitates this. And there may be new animals exploited. Again, the use of AI can trigger this by facilitating new developments in synthetic biology. And there may be new forms of harm, which we can't predict now, just as in the past they didn't predict insect farming as it occurs now. In addition, if we consider wild animal suffering, we can also predict that things may go pretty bad for wild animals. First, because they may face harsher environments as a result of, for instance, climate change. Not only that, This is something that many animal advocates are not familiar with. But not all wild animals have lives that go equally well for them. There are some that reproduce by having maybe just one offspring each time, but most of them reproduce by having huge numbers of offspring that on average don't make it to maturity. Most of them die when they are very young, and they suffer a great deal. And what's happening is that these animals are the ones that are going to make it in the future, thanks, among other things, to climate change, but not only to this. And this will mean that aggregate well-being out there in the wild will become worse. In addition, there may be larger numbers of individuals who have bad lives out there in nature. And this, again, is related to climate change. And this is very speculative, right? I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but I'm saying that there are chances that this may happen because of the way in which land is distributed on Earth. Meaning that those vast continents out there in the north, they may become greener, and there will be more animals who on average have pretty bad lives there. And then there is the danger of, sending animals out of Earth. And this is happening already. You can see here in this paper, which is about, something that happened 6 years ago. Well, this is the story of this Israeli ship that crashed onto the moon, and it was bringing invertebrates. So now there are invertebrates in the moon. And, well, this is not just something that happened at that point. This is something that is being investigated by different space agencies. There is a possibility of eventually maybe bringing animals to Mars or to other places, thus multiplying both animal exploitation but also wild animal suffering. Okay, so these risks are the risks that these forms of suffering occur. They are non-negligible. They are also potentially disastrous. I mean, the impact that this can have is huge. And they're very easy to overlook. And as a result, they are barely tackled right now. So, are there ways in which we can tackle them? They are, but we are not doing it. In fact, I would like you to consider this graph here. Well, it's a bit old. It's like, I think, 18 months old or something of the kind, more than 1 year old. But it nevertheless reflects what the situation continues to be right now. And as you can see there, it's interesting, not just because of the, of the amounts of money that goes to each column, but it's interesting because of how the columns are conceived, right? So you see there what amount of resources go to short-termist or near-termist advocacy or, charity work focus on humans, focus on animals, and then you have long-termism work, meaning that animals are not included in the long-termism column. That is the main worry I have here. Not only that, some of you here may have been already applying for money to do animals and long-termism work, and maybe you applied for grants to animal funders, and they didn't give you the grant because they are focused on near-termist work, and then you applied to funds related to long-termism work, and they didn't fund you either because they are not considering animals, or for that sake, non-human sentient beings in their equations. This is the problem we are facing now. So, as for the actual solutions there, well, I'm not coming now here with, magical solutions or anything, but I'm just gonna tell a few words about what are the ways in which we can try to address these problems. And maybe we can classify them into, these are vague categories, but basically we have targeted approaches, that can be successful if certain conditions apply, and wide or broad approaches that can work in many different scenarios, though their impact can be a bit less significant. So with targeted interventions, there are several examples that we are all familiar with, like the development of non-animal proteins or non-animal foods, banning new forms of harming animals, then the development of wild animal welfare science, there is an E missing there, sorry about that, would be another example of this. And preventing new forms of sentience, preventing the creation of new animals, for instance, would be another example. Finally, regulating space exploration, well, I consider it here a targeted approach, though in some ways it could be a broad approach, right? This is something that no one really is doing. The impact right now would be basically none, but in the future, this could have a huge impact. What about broad approaches? Well, we can do meta work, bring more people into the field. We could work on attitude change. We could work on institutional change. And we could work on non-anthropocentric AI alignment. Interestingly, this may have spillover effects in that by doing this kind of work, we would not just be helping non-human animals, that is biological beings, but we could also be doing work that could help other possible sentient beings that could exist in the future. Sentient AIs, digital minds. There is some kind of moral and strategic convergence here. In fact, suppose that you are concerned about digital minds and you want to change the attitudes of the public about this. What would you do? Well, this kind of animal advocacy that I'm pointing at would be an example of this. And actually, the organization I work with, Animal Ethics, when we give talks about animals, we always mention digital sentience as well. We say, you know, this is something that could happen in the future. Even if it never happens, this exemplifies that concern for sentient beings is something that can have all these other effects that are desirable, which is that if these minds existed, they would be important. And, well, there is a word missing there. But this has to do with, you know, different kinds of discrimination based on different criteria that we can challenge, appealing at the relevance of sentience in the same way. Species discrimination is wrong, size discrimination, which is in fact a form of speciesism, is wrong, and discrimination based on substrate would be wrong as well. So basically, to conclude, these spillover effects are based on this idea that anthropocentrism is wrong, and simple minds, even if they are just very, very simple, as those of invertebrates who may just have a few neurons, but they are enough for them to be sentient. Or if it's about some very, very simple digital minds that are not like those of humans, these simple minds matter too. This is the logo of a band, by the way. It's not a band that I like, you know, but anyway. I like classical music and hardcore punk and metal. Not this band, but it's a great logo for this story. So simple minds matter. And that's pretty much it. If you want more information, you can take a look at Animal Ethics website. There are some videos, some materials and stuff about all these things. And remember what I said. We're not going to make it to the next century, but the impact of our work can make it to the next century, right? Of course, you can say, well, there's going to be a takeover by AIs, and there will be no next century. Well, even if that's the case, then our work along these lines can have an impact next decade, 2 decades from now, and so on. So thanks. Looking forward to your questions.